I'm really excited to kind of talk about some concepts in big data, and I'm sure a lot of this you guys probably have already heard. At the end, I'll give a quick little use case on how we're using data to kind of drive business forward. So we live in this sea, in this world of data, and I don't think we even have a sense of how much there really is out there today, and how much we've just begun to scratch the surface of what we can do and what we're being tracked. Every interaction, everything that we do is being tracked. And think about the opportunities from a business perspective. I look at this and I ask myself every day, have I made the right choice in going into B2B enterprise sales and predictive? Because there's just so much there today. We're like on the cusp of a whole new revolution. We went through, every century there's a new technology, from steam power to electricity to the atomic energy to microprocessors to today. I think it's all about data and how we can use data to drive the business and the world forward. So imagine a world where parents are tracking their children as they're driving, and we know where they go, how long they were at the places they were. So imagine a world where that's being tracked and that's just commonplace. Imagine a world where senior citizens are enabled to maintain their independence and stay at home longer and not have to go into homes. Imagine where we put down a carpet and we're watching grandma's foot tracks everywhere she goes, and as she goes up and down the stairs, we can see when that pace slows and when something might be off, and that can alert their children or alert 911 if something seems to be off. When we see a tsunami is coming, we can alert developing countries that these things are happening before they happen. And farmers can yield 100, 1,000 times more crops because they know what the weather's going to be for that season. Imagine a world where we're digesting tracking devices monitor our blood pressure and our heart rate and all of our activity. We've seen with the Fitbits and the Nike bands, which I usually wear the Nike band, we can track our activity and things like that, but we can actually use that as an early detection system for the healthcare industry to know when you have a disease far before the symptoms show up, far before you see that that's happening. All of this is possible, and this is the world that we live in today. These things are happening, and imagine from a business perspective the opportunities that there are out there. I mean, I just can't even get my head around what we haven't even begun to do this. The technology is there, and the opportunities for us in a private and business and public sector to actually make a living out of this and actually change the world are immense. But I think the challenge is in that there is so much data is how to derive value and insight from that data. So even like grandmother tracking, walking her footsteps, it's value to grandmother, but where's the value back to the business and how are we going to change the world on this? And I was looking at some graphs the other day of Facebook and looking at all the connections, and everybody is connected at 4-degree separation. But how is that useful and how is that insightful? I like to think of it as, think of what is that one use case, that one thing that you can drive your business forward and really stay focused and operationalize. And try to, once you get that data, how do you apply it and how do you make the data act and take the humans out of it? So the big challenge is driving that value and insight, pulling all these different channels of data together and getting insight from that data. Oops, not liking it, there we go. A lot of the market talk today talks about big data. You talk to the enterprise space that's out there. You talk to B2B. I spend a lot of time with customers, Cisco and Intel and HP and others, and they talk about they're bringing all their data together and they're building these Hadoop systems. But the question is, well, what are we going to do with this? So how are we going to drive our business forward? Yeah, they're processing and storing the data, but it's companies that really can think about how to get customers' insights and really how to apply it back to their business and make it easy and consumable. Take the massive amounts of information and synthesize that. Those are the businesses that are going to be most successful today. And the number one use case for an enterprise company in data is really helping grow their business. What can be more valuable than going back and saying, I'm going to increase your business by X%. One lead that converts, then that actually to help them drive and see where those customers and those opportunities are. And so that's kind of the focus that we put on the 6 Sense, the data that we're using to drive businesses forward from an enterprise space. But really forecasting their business is one thing. We've just begun to touch the surface of where the forecasting capabilities are in the business sector. So what do you want to do with the data? So that's the first question is, how are you going to use this to optimize marketing, to drive sales, to innovate? How are you going to increase the social impact of your campaigns? I spent a lot of time last year in a movie called Girl Rising, and really trying to measure the effect of Girl Rising on the world and the impact that we're having. And I'll have a slide at the end to talk about that. But the data was there, but we didn't have the systems to put it all together. And it was really hard. If you don't have those systems to put it together, how are you going to measure all these different data points all around? That's just an incredibly enormous, overwhelming, daunting challenge. So the second step is first, what are you going to do with the data? And second is to collect it and analyze it and really try to take the humans out of it. So I really think about operationalizing data and not looking at reports and analysis and using them subjectively to drive your own goals forward, which I've spent a lot of time in rooms, Cisco and other customers where they're looking at all of this data, and they say to themselves, okay, well, we try to run this campaign, and we're going to look at it. We see that 20% lift is good, so we're going to actually use that to drive our own objectives forward. And that's the challenge when you start to look at it and do an analysis on the data. I think we're in a world today where your data should be driving your organization and the humans should come out of it. So allow the data to feed into other downstream systems, to have those systems interact and have them act based on that information. So as much as you can take the humans out, the more that we're going to actually be in this world, we really are commoditizing data. We really are able to actually see that happen and see it happen in a real-time cycle. So the use case I'm going to talk about is predicting sales. So using multiple channels of data to predict sales. So basically what we're thinking about is taking all the behavioral interactions. So this is just touching the surface of the data that's possible, but all the web and digital interactions, social and blogs and surveys and marketing automation and CRM data, and tying all that together, tying it together with the wealth of third-party data that's out there. So for example, there are companies like Demandbase that tie IP address to DUNS numbers. So you can say what an anonymous person, and you can tie that back to the company that they work for. So then we can take all the anonymous traffic that's happening online and tie that back to a company. So we tie that back to their sale, their end sale at the end of the day. So the example I'm going to show today is we took 24 months of sales data from Cisco with 400,000 customers. We said, what did they do prior to buying? Tied up all this data, brought this all together and said, let's look for patterns. Let's see what they do prior to buying. Then when other companies come in and exhibit the same pattern, we say ABC company is going to buy routers. They're going to buy it in the next 3 to 6 months, and they're going to buy 10 times more than they normally do. So the idea is that we took the idea of all this data and synthesized it down to, okay, we're going to increase your business because we're going to tell you who's going to buy, when they're going to buy, and what they're going to buy. Now you can use that in all of your downstream sales and marketing systems. So we're really just trying to keep that very simple example and make it something they can actually internalize and do something with, rather than showing them you do have all this information and there's a wealth of information to do so much with, but then how do you actually act on it? How do you actually drive your business? Try to keep it as simple as possible and think about those really targeted use cases that really help you drive forward. This is an example where we were doing the prediction. So basically you can see the 138 predicted the $27,000 booking and the $228,000, $69,000 booking. There's a correlation between the size of the booking and the size of the spike and the size of the booking that happened. So we're able to say for an SME, when it goes to 5x, they're going to go from a $1,000 to a $5,000 booking. And an enterprise company, they're going to go from a $1 million booking to a $5 million booking. And so we can give that to inside sales and we can give that to territory managers based on the size of that account that's going to book. So we're identifying new customers, lost opportunities, their likelihood to purchase, what they're going to purchase, when they're going to purchase, how much they're going to purchase, and then we send it to all the downstream sales and marketing systems. So it goes into Salesforce and marketing automation and content management. And last year alone, Cisco predicted $300 million of net new business, and they said next year this is going to grow their business by $4 billion. So these are just a simple example, and not thinking about all the wealth of all the information that's out there today, but how can I use this to actually, what's that one thing that I can impact and I can change, and I can actually see a difference in the business based on your objectives. So go back to what your objectives are as a company, and then find that one thing, and what are those data sources, and allow your data to tell you what's useful, as opposed to you thinking what data is useful. Right? So bring in other data. We're constantly testing all kinds of different data sources to see which ones are predictive, and it's sometimes the ones that we never would have imagined would be predictive, that would actually tell us, what those companies are, that the size that the company went from, they changed their role, their CTO role. When that changes, it may go from a virtualized company to a non-virtualized company, and that can be predictive of buying routers. So things that aren't necessarily intuitive can actually tell us and give us a lot of information at the end of the day. So the last example here that I'm going to show, and I know I only have 10 minutes, I'm not sure where I am on my time, but is with Girl Rising. So I spent a lot of time trying to measure impact in Girl Rising. And so we had so many sources of data, and really we thought of this as kind of the framework of 3 buckets of changing minds, changing policy, and changing lives. So how can we measure what's happening on the ground? So Girl Rising is a campaign about educating girls in developing countries, and that's the single best way to help countries get out of their issues today and create sustainability. So it was a movie about 10 girls in 10 countries with several A-list celebrities that were in it. I don't know if you've seen it, but I'm really excited to have been a part of this. Part of what we were doing is helping them measure the impact and measure the strategy. So taking all this data together and building models to see what is most effective when we reach people and what's the change in the policy, when we're actually on the ground. So this is going to take a long time before we actually see the long-term measure of what was happening. But bringing all these sources together to come back with just 3 simple buckets of how we think about the impact that this movie had on the world. Thank you.
industries in which big data is being used the most frequently? Which are they? What do they tend to use big data for the most?
Well, I mean, so I think the first one is obviously the financial sector has figured out data, right? So predicting, what's going to happen in the markets and that kind of thing. But we also see that's where they haven't been always that successful, right? So we've seen things happen where they've used data and it's not always successful. So certain cases like that, if I'm predicting, so for sales, at an 85% accuracy rate, that's pretty darn good. The other 15% that I'm not getting, so what? In the financial world, you can't be off by 15% or the whole world can crash, right? So the tolerance for the false negatives versus false positives, based on the industry, is something to really think about as well. So there's a really high tolerance when I'm trying to just guess and give them new leads. Some of them can be off and some of them can be right. The other, I'd say, in the medical and the biotech industry, they're using data in incredible ways to really kind of change the way we think about medicine and the way that we think about reacting to possible threats and diseases and things that are out there, and getting ahead of before you have symptoms. That's one of my favorite things. Like, to know you have something before you even start to feel the sniffle of a cold. You know you have a cold because there's a detection, and you took a detectable microchip that's actually tracking your blood pressure and your heart rate and things, and they can see when there's something off.
Great. And and please, anyone feel free with if you have questions. And until then, I will just continue to ask them. Yes.
Well, I'm very curious about the last slide. So you said you had a mashup, of data sources, and so what were those data sources for something like Girl Rising?
Well, we had everything from we were tracking policy, so at the government level, we were doing Pew polls as well, and then we were doing all the digital interactions and tracking there. So Google was supposed to give us $1 billion of AdWords, didn't necessarily come through, but we were tracking all the way through from the impressions to what was happening on the site and happening through the donations. And the goal was to raise $20 million for girls in the 9 NGO partners. So we were tracking, just from a digital perspective there, but trying to tie it all back to, and not, I could give all these reports to show all this that was happening, but really we wanted to tie it back to those 3 tangible. Did we change minds? Did we change lives? Did we change policy? And what are those key indicators that are going to tell us that we did this? And over time, it's really going to take over time to see the impact that we had. And unfortunately, because they didn't have all the money in the world, we don't have all the tools to actually make it all happen. So we were kind of gluing things together with the resources that we had. But there's a huge opportunity in that space to be able to pull these things together. And if I did have the technology to be able to do that, then we would pull all that together and be able to really make a difference and really see where our efforts were going. We're going to focus on this campaign, or focus on TV versus CNN versus the print media in certain countries, and really see what's working there.
Participant Media, and they have their Take Part. Have you? And they're doing a lot of work on how to track the impact of their work. Have you been in contact with them?
Yeah, Girl Rising is definitely working with them.
Great.
Yep. Yeah.
Victoria.
Just building off of your last comment, so in working on the Girl Rising campaign, other than them not having the same resources, did you see other differences in that versus your other client work?
I mean, the major differences is that I focus B2B enterprise and sales, right? So in my own personal experience in the client work, so it's different there because, I had to try to shift my mind and thinking about, okay, I'm helping companies predict sales and grow their business, and how am I going to measure social impact? But it's the same. At the end of the day, it really is. You pick that end measure, that point of what you want to measure. You look at things that have been successful in the past, and then you say, what are those indicators that led to success? And it's really the same process. So really, you're taking all those different data points, and we can say these are the indicators that drove this success event, whatever that happens to be. So we thought about it in the same method that we did, in terms of sales. But we said, okay, let's pick those key measurable things that we're trying to achieve. Let's take campaigns that have been successful and movies that are on the top, and let's look at what they did, and then look at those indicators, and then drive that and help that influence how we go about our campaign and our strategy for Girl Rising.
So if we were to make an analogy between, an investor is in a sense looking to rent money, right? Yeah. In a sense, or sell money or whatever it is. So if we were to make an analogy between predicting sales and predicting customers who have a combination of good financial return, maybe organizations that are about to hire entry-level people with decent jobs, some set of things like that. Would that
Absolutely.
Be something that could be predicted?
All the companies that you have done that with, whether yourself or other investment firms have invested in that have been successful against those metrics, And then we take all of our data points, what are those things, and then tell you what are those things about that company that made that successful. Was it the age of the CEO that had something to do with it? Was it the location they were? Was it really what their business was and what their end objectives are? So if you put all those data points in, one, you can predict who's going to be successful, and I think you can do that very well. You can actually build a model to predict companies that will be successful. And two is you can see what those things are that drove that company to be successful and take the subjectivity out of it. So data allows us to take those, what we think to be the predictors, and what, when I've been in kind of pitching VCs for a while and going through that process. I know the game, and a lot of it's subjective. They're reading me and whether they believe in me as a CEO and as a founder of a company, if they're going to put their money in us, and obviously they have to check all the boxes. But I would suggest take a lot of keep that piece in there, but you can take a lot of that out and get much further in your decision process in terms of which companies are going to make it in the world based on other companies that have made it, and using the same criteria to evaluate success.
And Amanda, assuming that these are relatively small companies, how many companies would you need in order to build a good model?
So it's not about the size of the company, it's about what we're predicting and that there's data there. So we have chosen B2B enterprise and it's not impulse buys. So what we're doing right now, and there are solutions that do that, what we're doing is saying there's a lot of digital interaction that leads up to a sale. There's a lot of things that happen, and there's a lot of data points. So the more data you have, the better you are at predicting. So something like Zappos shoes or Amazon's, I'm predicting somebody's gonna have an impulse, like I'm an online addicted shopper. And we wouldn't be able to, the models that we're doing, be able to do that because we don't have as much history to go off of. So you can do a lot better in the predictive space when you have more data and you have more data points to actually build that against.
I'll monopolize this conversation if you let me, so you guys jump in. But so what do we know about how translatable the predictive model is? So for example, mindful of some of the groups in the room and some of the interests we have, online giving. Could there be a predictive model around the series of actions that a donor takes prior to giving online? And have you done that? Has somebody done that? What do we know about that space?
I haven't personally done that, but I believe that probably some of your customers have done that. Yes, I'm sure that somebody has done that somewhere, and as long as there is data, I'd be able to track those people. The challenge, one of the key challenges though in all of this is your keys, to be able to track across data sources. So we're able to connect at a company level by the anonymous IP address back to a DUNS number of a company that bought, so that's why I'm able to tie all these disparate data sources together. And then in the online and the ad space, you can do it by impressions, and you can see if it's an ad network giving the same ads out, you can actually track them. But once they get to the website, then you have third-party tracking, and you can't cross it. So data is only as good as you can connect it, to be honest. So if you don't have those connection points, that's where. So in the online, so back to your question about the online giving, it would be about how well you can connect that data. But as long as you can connect it and tie it either at an individual, a contact, or a company level, or some kind of aggregate that you can kind of build patterns, then you absolutely can do it.
Oh, go ahead, Diego. Richard, we'll come to you next.
You've been very successful with enterprise doing all this big data stuff, and you've had some experience now with the social sector. What do you think are the main things that are inhibiting the non-for-profit sector to do more big data? Is it the data curating?
Our biggest challenge, was a lot of it was data. We were using a lot of freeware tools, so it wasn't collecting data in the way that we would collect it at Cisco or HP, right? So I wasn't getting it. Like, for example, Google Analytics as a web tracking solution only gives you aggregate level data. I can't get individual level. I can't actually see IP address or cookies from Google Analytics and get raw data. So I need raw data to take in at the transactional level in order to do it. So that we went with Google because, Google is one of our sponsors of the campaign also. So we had to use Google and all their tracking devices. So a lot of it is, it's about the data, and it also goes back in the social sector too. They only can spend so much money on marketing and advertising, and they're set by these standards. So Girl Rising wasn't a 501(c)(3), so we were able to spend money there because it came out of a journalism background, and so we're a for-profit, giving money to NGOs so that we could actually spend money in the marketing and know that we have to reach people in order to make a difference. And I don't think that in a lot of, as we all know, in the social sector, you can't spend that money, and so you can't actually put those tools in place to do that. And it's an afterthought. And a lot of the times, so it always, tracking became, we have this big campaign, this big idea, we want to do this, now we want to track it. Well, it's too late, right? So you have to set those things up ahead of time. It has to be something that you go into the business with going forward.
Yeah, great. Richard, and one more question after that. Here.
I was just going to maybe speak to your earlier comment and question about online donations and giving. And so I am aware of at least one startup that's doing some of this. So a lot of what you described is already done to a tremendous level by online companies that do ad targeting and e-commerce optimization and consumer and conversions. And if you think about it, online giving is not that dissimilar to basically buying something online. And so a lot of those techniques and technologies can be applied. You just have to map sort of different ontologies and calls to actions, right? And it's absolutely already being done today by a couple companies. So.
And the same practices apply no matter what that end thing is that you're trying to track, right? So whether it's sales or social or giving or whatever, just you have an endpoint, there's things that lead up to that endpoint, and what are those things? And then let's predict other people that are going to hit that same end event.
Great. Catherine, did you have the last question? Elizabeth?
Yes, no worries, no worries. I just wanted to make an observation, and that is transactional data distinct from sentiment. So when I think about the challenge that was posed by the last problem set, it really is, it's a challenge of sort of the gestalt of what goes into sentiment is different sometimes than the transactions. And I agree with the notion that the transactional systems are largely present today. I think a fertile ground to look at for this particular domain of sort of are we changing the hearts and minds, I think is really from our brand friends. Sort of if we think about consumer products and if we think about, the investments that firms have made around understanding sentimentality, do I like Prius today? What's happening in the world? How's that changing? I think that's a place to also look. In addition to being able to link the data, it's also who's built those more psychographic models around sentiment.
And I would add to that it's taking tying the qualitative and quantitative together is incredibly important, and then having metadata behind that. So really good metadata framework strategies will help you tie the sentiment data to the quantitative data that's there. There's a lot of companies that just do that, right? So they're focused just on the metadata strategies.
Sorry, can you explain that?
Yeah, so...
What does that mean?
What did she say? So if... So she's talking about more, so there's quantitative data, like the hard numbers of like web tracking and stuff, and then there's qualitative and sentiment data, and that's more freeform. I like this, I don't like this, and the subjective stuff, right? And like all the social data is a lot of it sentiment, right? Or it's trying to understand and put. And metadata is to categorize, basically, take that data and categorize it into buckets. And so if you can categorize those words into certain areas, good versus bad, and then you can tie it to what they're doing, you can see what actions lead to positive or negative reaction. So it actually becomes just another data point because the metadata makes it something that's, that's the whole world. There's tons I can go into. I'm going to hold a talk on that, but I won't. For how to, categorize all of this sentiment data that's out there today. Because all of the social and all of that, it's not hard transactional data where I actually have a field that says buy, yes, no. $5, $10. They're saying, oh, I like this or I don't like this.
Excellent. Well, Amanda, thank you so much, and please join me in thanking you.